feel like it, just take a moment to connect with everybody in the group by just looking at them in the eyes for a few seconds. If you don't feel like doing it, don't feel forced to do it. So for a moment, imagine that everybody you've looked at, you've actually been looking at yourself. Some of you might actually feel that when this happens. But even if you're not feeling that, think about that for a moment. We're always looking at ourselves. And not just the humans we look at, but all the animals as well, all the beautiful plants, and all the other, what I call mineral objects, so the mountains, the rocks, clouds, the rivers, even the other planets. Even the mosquito.
But I missed him.
You missed him. So this is really what we're talking about in these sessions, that we're an inseparable part of everything. We always have been and we always will be. No matter what we think we are, we're always an inseparable part of everything, the totality. Is anybody interested in science, quantum physics?
Yes.
Anybody else?
What I can understand of quantum physics, yes.
So some quantum physicists are basically saying what the Advaita teaching is saying, which is that everything is this interconnected stuff, energy, bunch of particles. And one particular quantum physicist, I think his name is David Bohm, said something like, every particle always knows what every other particle is doing and where it is at any moment in time in the infinite universe and all universes. So putting it simply, the particles that make up our body, our mind, what we are, this particular particle here knows exactly what the particles are doing in every single other body, every single object. And that's happening right now, all the time. So it's like an infinite matrix of knowledge. And we can even say that it's in some way communicating all the time, sharing all this information all the time. It's sharing all this experience. And they've even tested that in laboratories, actually in very big tunnels. There's a place underneath France in Geneva called the European Centre for Nuclear Research. And they split particles, and they find that these two parts of the same particle at great distances behave in exactly the same way when something is done just to one part of the particle. So I've taken a particle, I've split it, and I've sent it 7.5 kilometers apart, for example, and then I do something to this part of the particle. I apply some energy to it. This particle will react and behave in exactly the same way as this particle. And what they then found after that was the particle that's reacting is actually reacting before the particle that is something is being applied to. So they concluded that actually space and time doesn't exist for particles, for these particular particles. So that's kind of interesting, because that's what the spiritual teachers, the sages, have been saying for thousands and thousands of years. That what we are is not these separate objects. So if your mind is able to get around that, then it can understand really what we're talking about in a very simple way. What this teaching and other teachings is pointing to, that we've never been just these separate objects. And if you can accept that, then what we say is birth and death, birth, life and death, is not a separate series of moments or events, and it's not even necessarily linear or sequential. It's just happening all the time. So what we can say is that what we're pointing to is a way that we can wake up, all of us, anybody, can wake up at any moment out of this dream. We can put it like that. It's not a dream that we have in the night, but it's a dream that we are these separate objects. We can wake up out of this dream, this belief that we are just these separate objects. And if we understand then what is waking up, it's the one energy, this matrix, the totality. You can use the word God or consciousness, whatever word you want to use. It is waking itself up. That's why we call it self-realization. So that opportunity to wake up out of the dream of separation, out of all these false beliefs, is given to us by ourselves and is available at any moment in our life. This opportunity is given to us by ourselves and is available at any moment in our life. So if we see it in one way, it's a bit of a comedy. We've chosen to forget who we are, to identify with being just this body-mind organism, and of course with the whole story that goes with it. And we have photos to prove that story. And then we go looking for answers to the questions concerning who we are, concerning our suffering, concerning this life we're living, concerning our fears, our dreams, etc. But fundamentally, the one self, which is what we are, has chosen, we can say, to fall asleep, to forget, to not know itself. And if we look at it like that, it seems a bit ridiculous. Or it can seem like a bad joke. Or on days when we're suffering a lot, it's a real tragedy. So at any moment, this realization can happen. It doesn't need any special conditions. It doesn't need a special practice, even though we suggest practices and inquiries. It can happen anywhere, at any time, day or night. The opportunity is always available. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past. It doesn't matter how bad we've been. I was very bad. Well, I thought I was very bad. There are stories of murderers who have woken up, who have realized their true nature. I don't know whether they continued to murder afterwards, but probably not. Great kings, beggars, had a few animals in his ashram, and he talks about even the animals waking up to their true nature, realizing who they are. Why do we place so much importance on this? Waking up from the dream, realizing oneself. Because most of our, what we call suffering, most of our psychological and emotional pain is based on the idea, the deep belief that we are separate. If you look at that for a moment, you look at your own suffering, your own pain. If it's not big suffering, big pain, then just look at your seeking, what you're looking for, and see how, if for a moment, even just for a few seconds, if you could totally accept, I've never actually been just this separate body, mind, ego, but I'm actually an inseparable part of the totality of life. I'm not separate from the trees or the animals or the sky or the rain or the snow or the air I'm breathing. I've never been. I never will be. If just for a second you can see that, your mind can understand that, then how does it feel? What do you then think about yourself? What do you then feel and think about other people? And more importantly, what do you then think and feel about the things that have happened to you in your life which have made you suffer and experience pain, that have caused you to look for answers to your questions? Just for a few seconds, see that. In those few seconds, or from the memory of those few seconds, or if you've had longer experiences of this in different forms, then how do we see the other people in our life? How do we see ourselves? How do we see the suffering that we are carrying? Even if the suffering is simply confusion, or not knowing something in particular, or the questions we have, even if it's that kind of suffering. It doesn't have to be major trauma or major suffering. How do we then see the others in our life? How do we then see ourself, what we call our self, with this understanding that we've never been separate, ever been separate from life itself? Do you want to say something? Huh? For some of us it might be humbling. It might be a feeling of great love or compassion, connection, unlimited joy and peace. For others it might feel a bit strange or even fearful. It might seem confusing. We can understand that any emotion that's arising, anything we're feeling in our body right now, and all the thoughts we're having about what we're hearing, not only in our own head, but from the voice of this strange being that's saying these things. All these reactions are also this one source, this one consciousness, this one God, this one energy, this infinite matrix, which we've never been separate from. And really this is the core of the whole Advaita teaching. Advaita means non-duality. And it's the core of many of the other spiritual teachings, which have different names. For thousands of years, different people have been pointing to this. Some of the better known ones are Jesus Christ, the Buddha, Muhammad, Krishna, Lao Tzu, many, many different teachers. If it wasn't such a male-dominated world, we'd have more female names in there. The men seem to have erased those from the records. So at any moment we can wake up out of this dream, this illusion of separation. Because it's never actually existed. We have a feeling of separation, which doesn't go away even after we wake up, after self-realization happens. So I'm sitting here and I feel that the surface of this chair, I feel the surface of this chair, the texture of the surface of this chair, which is different to the texture and surface of another object I'm feeling. If I taste it, it might have a different taste. Smell it, hear it, look at it. So the five senses give us this information which makes us believe that these are separate objects. And then this information is converted into a thought, a belief. I feel it separate, so then it must be separate. And that's sometimes the confusion for the seeker. There can remain, or there has been, this feeling of separation. So we confuse the feeling of separation, the sense of separation, with what is actually happening, with what we actually are. So we use different metaphors to try and describe that. The waves on the ocean. Every wave is unique. Every wave definitely exists. All waves actually behave in different ways, different heights, lengths. They last for different periods of time. But you would agree that every wave is inseparable from the ocean. We can see that when we look at waves. They've never been separate from the ocean. When we look at it more closely, it's very clear that it's the ocean that makes the wave arise, gives it energy. And then the wave comes back into the ocean. It's born from the ocean and it comes back into the ocean. So when we look at the ocean, it's very clear there's never been these separate waves. Another metaphor that's used is gold jewelry. Gold jewelry is made from gold. The gold is fundamentally the same. It might vary slightly, but it's still gold. And yet all this gold jewelry has different shapes and forms. But it's all fundamentally made from gold. When the snow falls, we call it snow, but every single snowflake, as far as I know, is actually different, individual snowflakes. But they're all snow. So we can look at a number of different metaphors, a number of different ways of trying to understand this. Every night when we go to sleep and we're in deep sleep, we forget that we are separate. We forget our suffering. We forget the story of who we are. we forget all the claims, good and bad. So we can say that every night we have a direct experience of this oneness that we are, or this lack of separation that we are. And then every morning when we wake up at some point, this idea comes back, this belief comes back. And the minute it comes back, I is the center of this idea. This little thought, I, and in English, 4 other little thoughts, me, mine, myself, my. I, me, mine, myself, my. These 5 little personal pronouns create this identity, create this belief, I am separate. And pretty much everything that happens then in our life while we are awake is claimed in some way by this thought, I. We call that the ego. We've got a nice spiritual name for it. We call it the ego. The ego then claims everything that's happening to itself. It becomes personal. And in that moment we claim it as mine, we say that there is another. Him, she, her, it, they, them, etc. So we've created duality in our mind. Our mind has created duality. Not just from the experience of the so-called separate object, the feeling of separation, but it gets reinforced by this so-called mind that says, I'm here and they are there. This is me and that is it. Unless, during the day, other things happen. We're watching a beautiful sunset, we're making love, we're just dancing or reading, listening to music, riding a bicycle, walking, cooking, anything, some activity. And there's no thought about ourself or about... What does that mean?
So it's the dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna, what you were saying just before.
Uh-huh.
You do your karma, but the outcome is not in your hands, so you go ahead and do it, so that's the truth.
Is it the truth?
I think so.
Okay. So I would say that's a concept, a pointer.
Yeah.
I never know the word true. I have to say true
Right.
or truth. I have no idea really what it means.
Okay.
Because it, somehow maybe my little mind just says it's not true, with the opposite.
Right.
It's false.
Yes.
But truth itself, I like life or so, but the word truth,
Yes.
sorry.
No, it's good. And it's just words, isn't it? But if we just look at it, is there anything that we can say that doesn't have its opposite? I am not. I, okay, then there's a sense of is not.
Then everything is a concept.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah. So even what Krishna is saying to Arjuna is a conceptual pointer that's helping Arjuna to realize that what his fundamental nature is nothing that can actually be talked about or described. But we have to use these words to help the mind to understand and accept that. And if you just check yourself, every thought you have, any thought you have, will have an opposite thought. Any idea, opposite. Any concept, opposite. Yeah? Anything we conceive will have an opposite. Any experience, state, an opposite. Any feeling, an opposite. Yeah? That's what we call duality. What we're pointing to is that we can't just be this set of polaric opposites. Yeah? There's something else which we are, which is either the source or the ground or the infinity, whatever you want to say about it, that's prior to or beyond just these opposites. This particular concept helps Arjuna to realize he is not the doer or the author of his actions. That there's something which has already decided what he's going to do and has already created the outcome. So this particular concept in the Gita helps the mind to relinquish the idea of being in control, being the doer or the author of actions. That's why it's used in this way. Further on in the Gita, Krishna says something else, says it differently. And then eventually Krishna doesn't need to say anything to Arjuna because Arjuna has understood and accepted everything. Arjuna doesn't need the words anymore. Arjuna realizes his fundamental nature. Yeah? So if you look at any teaching, Indian or other, it's just a concept, just a pointer. If you've understood it, let it go. Any concept or pointer, if you've understood it, let it go. And something else will appear. Don't cling to it. Don't cling to it as the truth. It becomes dogma. It becomes repetition. Do you understand?
Yeah. Everything correct.
Reminds me of a pointer. It's like whatever can be forgotten is not the truth.
Why is that?
Why is whatever can be forgotten is not the truth? Because the truth is always and forever, and that's it.
So it can neither be forgotten or remembered.
The truth cannot. Truth can be remembered. The truth is.
That's right. That's why it can't be forgotten or remembered.
Yeah.
So what is? How can you describe what is, what you are? If that's what you're interested in.
Ever present.
So what are you looking for? What brings you to these?
Not looking.
Mhm.
Not looking. Just just letting it all drop away.
What?
This, like you call this me thought, this
Mhm.
personal identity. Yeah.
Mhm.
So to like coming and sitting here, it's like a it's more, it's letting it just drop away. Yeah.
Yes. But isn't this letting it drop away just another idea?
Yeah.
Another belief? Yes? So, in other words, do you need to let it drop away? It's what is. What is everything and nothing. So what is both what is dropping away and what is not dropping away. What is both the me and even identification. And no me, no identification. Because what is everything. Yes? Including nothing. So at this point of the understanding, you don't need to drop anything. If you've understood what is, you've accepted what is. Then the me is what lives the rest of this life. Knowing the me lives the rest of this life. The ego lives the rest of this life. The same ego lives the rest of this life, knowing it is not just this. Might seem a paradox. The impersonal and the personal, the absolute and the relative, the me and the no me, are understood to be one and the same. What is? Do you see that? So then the body-mind organism continues to exist. We can't drop this. That's when we die. The ultimate dropping is the death of the body-mind organism. But the body-mind organism needs the ego, needs some identification for life to be lived. Otherwise we'd sit around like beautiful vegetables. Very beautiful, calm, peaceful, blissed out vegetables. We wouldn't be able to function. Maybe you've had those states. So you don't want to be a vegetable. You want to be an active person enjoying all the things that you enjoy in life. Being productive, creative, having relationships. That's what the ego allows you to do. The ego is the functioning element of consciousness. Consciousness, the body-mind organism, and the ego, these three go together to allow life to happen in this third, fourth dimensional experience, existence. When the ego drops away temporarily in deep sleep, in dreams, in an unconscious state, we can't function in samadhi as well. We can't function. It's not a desirable dropping away, is it? What we're talking about when we say drop away is we drop away the two ideas that keep us in bondage. One is, I am separate. The second is, I am the doer, author of my actions. These two little ideas keep us in bondage, keep us in psychological, emotional suffering. So that's what we want to drop away. Would you agree? The rest, no need. And not desirable, because then how can we do all the things we want to do in life? Can you see the difference? Ramana Maharshi said, the only difference between the ego of a so-called sage and the ego of a so-called normal person. I add the word so-called. At this level of your understanding, there's never been a sage and a normal person, has there? Because it's all just what is. So these differentiations we make are just intellectual, mental. Yeah? When you know what is, then we're more interested in how's my life, with this understanding that you have, how's my life now going to play out? How am I going to live this same life? Yeah? So the ego of the sage is only different from the ego of a so-called normal person, because the ego of the sage, there's no